Good afternoon. Kicking off our afternoon session will be a keynote presentation from Jack Lifton. He's the Senior Advisor to Energy Fuels. This presentation is titled Surveying the Critical Metals Landscape. Welcome back, Jack.
Right. I'm also the co-chairman of the Critical Minerals Institute in Canada. Uh, and I'm very senior. I'm the oldest guy there. So what I'd like to talk about today is what I see as the misdirection of this whole critical minerals thing. Okay, because we're talking about supply. That's really of very little interest. It's demand that's the problem. Okay, and demand is not. It's not our demand that's the problem. That's what you don't understand. It's China's demand. We all ignore China's consumer, internal, domestic consumer demand. Let me tell you why that's important. As you know, China produces 90% of the processed rare earth products in the world. 90%. Okay. 85% of that, you can all do the math. 85% of that is for domestic consumption. The balance is export. And you need to understand that if China's consumer market should ignite, like everybody has to have a washing machine, a dryer, an electric car, all of that stuff, and that squeezes what they can export. They don't give a damn about it. If they can't export to us, blow skin off their noses, they don't care. Okay, we doing the American ostrich thing, we stick our heads in the sand and say, I don't see any problem. Okay? Now, there's a huge problem. Let's see. They consume 85%. Basically, let's put it this way. Let's assume they produce 100% of the world's useful rare earths, useful to us. Yes, Linus produces quite a bit, goes to Japan. What's left over goes to China. MP was producing a lot. Almost all of that went to China. Okay, so let's assume the Chinese produce 100% of the world's rare earths. When the day comes they need 100% of that for domestic use, we're out of luck. Nobody's planning. Nobody's planning about this. Everybody here only cares about price, except the military. U.S. military doesn't give a damn about price, as you well know. After we April 15th, we figured out. And what they care about is delivery on time. Okay, so they need the military needs, we think, about 1,200 tons of rare earth permanent magnets a year. That's for all their uses. So what did they do? They engaged a German rare earth permanent magnet company, the only major commercial producer in Europe, and it's moving its operations to Sumter, New Jersey, South Carolina, North Sumter, I don't know. Okay, and then they engaged the only metal maker in the Western world, plus Common Metals of Great Britain. They're building a plant adjacent to the Sumter plant. Then they engaged, so far, Linus of Australia to build a 5,000 ton rare earth separation plant in Texas, originally for 160 million, now at 560 million, and they have not started yet. Okay, and then they decided they'll use MP as an alternate supplier for raw materials. And so far, we're up to about $1 billion. Okay, they could care less. What they're now pressuring all of these components of the supply chain for is delivery. They're supposed to have commercial production of the magnets they need by next year. That date will not be met. Okay, but let's switch back to the civilian economy. They haven't done a thing. Okay, I'm from Detroit. Once, when before many of you were born, I was an automotive supplier. Okay, and they have not got a clue on where magnet motors. They don't buy magnets. They buy motors. They don't have a clue about the supply chain. General Motors decided we'll go with MP because it's easy to spell, MP. Okay, and so they they said, you guys will deliver us the magnets. We're going to build our own motor. Well, that motor factory plan got sort of sidelined. MP admitted to them they couldn't make the magnets. Uh, LG Electric makes the electric motors. General Motors, through their licensee Magna in Canada, the magnets come from the company in Shanghai. Okay? When I talked to General Motors purchasing, they told me we don't care about tariffs because the cost of building an electric car is, let's say it's maybe 75% of the selling price, maybe. Okay. So a typical electric car today from General Motors is $60,000, $45,000 cost, right? So the magnet, the rare magnet motor, if you buy it in China without a tariff, is about $125. If you buy it in Sumter, South Carolina, it's about 2 or 3 times that. That doesn't. Okay. So General Motors is thinking this way. If they put 100% tariff on it, adds what? $125. Now, normally, we would say that's a delivery charge for your car. We put it in there. But we're afraid that our friends at Stellantis, Ford, Hyundai, they won't add any price. So we'll keep the price the same, and we'll pay our president 21.972 billion a year, and that'll solve. Now, in the meantime, I talk to the Chinese. I go to conferences with the Chinese representatives, and they have most of the Chinese companies have American representatives, or in the case of the largest, they have Dutch people speaking. So I was talking to them, and they said, "Listen, we don't think we're going to lose the American business. We don't want to lose the American business because it's substantial." Can't turn it off. Anyway, so the Chinese are telling me, what can they do? Their government tells them what to do. Okay, they have no choice, but they want the American business. The fellow from one of the very largest Chinese companies said to me, he said, "Look," he said, "that's 25% of my company's business. We're not about to lose that." Okay, he said, "Okay, we'll make it." They were going to build a factory in Mexico, to take advantage of the takers never is a chance thing. Okay, and they didn't because the Chinese government told them to stop. Okay, not the Mexican government, Chinese. Okay, look, China is producing today 54% of refined copper in the world. Okay, China, as you know, is overbuilt their housing and large buildings. Okay, so the reason I'm mentioning that is that yes, an electric car uses 100 to 200 pounds of copper. That's true. Okay, but what do you think this building used? Okay, now here's the difference. You're going to recycle an electric car in a few years. This building's going to take a while. I used to tell people when you fly over New Jersey, you're looking at what happened to all the copper mines in Utah, all those lights. And I don't know about you fellows here, but back in Michigan, we live in a house, for a long time. So recycling housing wire or construct wire from the construction of buildings or street lights or the grid, that's decades. That's not like cars. Okay, the average life of a car in America is today 15 years. Now you may not believe that, but that's the number. Okay, so every 15 years they recycle enough steel, copper, aluminum, platinum, palladium, rhodium to build that year's number of cars. Okay? But of course, we've been doing this for a long time. So every year we really produce enough scrapping the vehicles to reproduce them. In other words, what's the critical problem? Okay. Now, We recycle steel, electric arc furnace certified steel. Okay, copper, recycle all the time. We're the world's biggest recyclers of lead. We even have, in case you're not aware of it, platinum, palladium, and rhodium recycling in the United States. We have bird, okay, that's a big business here, and it's severely reduced our need to import metals. But we still do. We still do import metals, okay, for new construction. But this is, to say, coming from me, this is obvious. This is a mature society, okay, economically, and as far as our need, what we're ignoring is other people. That's where the demand is coming from. Okay, and if you think that as South American demand increases, Chile's going to say, well, we'd like the warehouses in Santiago, but we'd rather send stuff copper to Europe. Don't believe it. Okay. Africans are waking up finally, and like the Congo, so-called Democratic Republic of the Congo, the dictator, which is the president of the Congo, is saying, "Hey, you guys ever hear of value add? At the Sorbonne where I took my degree, they were telling us about value add. We never heard it from your companies." So they're telling. I was involved recently in aluminum project, and they're saying, how far downstream do you go in the Congo? Well, need a lot of electricity. Okay, we will provide that. Uh, Obviously, they have the bauxite mineral. Okay, and then you produce aluminum metal. Now what? Well, what can you make from that in our country? This is all over Africa. This discussion. Okay, value add. What does that do? It reduces the export of those materials. Okay, and if you say, well, we'll just pay more, that doesn't work in societies that are a little more dictatorial than ours, because they say that's nice, but we need the stuff. Just to chat about uranium for a second, okay? The United States consumes more uranium than any other country in the world. 36 million pounds a year of 120 million pound production. Okay? We produce about 1 million pounds a year. I was just saying to a colleague of mine, the one company that produces that, I'm wondering if the military said, geez, we got to refuel 3 carriers this year, and you're sending that where? Duke Energy? It's confiscated. Oh, they'll pay for it. Okay. But I don't know that we produce enough to supply our military uranium directly. And we stopped producing, you realize yellow cake, uranium, U308. Oh, that's not what you use in a reactor. You use 0.7% of that U235 in reactors. So companies would extract that that portion, and they would enrich. They would take uranium from 0.7 to maybe 20% to 35, things like that, called enriched uranium, and that's what the fuel rods are made out of in a nuclear reactor, in a power reactor. Okay, now we used to have 2 companies here doing that. One was an Anglo-Dutch group, and the other one I think was an American company, Missouri. Anyway, I don't know that any of that is done here anymore. Okay, and we do have one new company that I think is going to do that, Centrus. Okay, but we've been buying our nuclear fuel from the Russians, 40% of our fuel. In other words, believe it or not, the Gerald Ford probably has fuel rods made by Rosatom. Okay, so that's just the way it is. Okay, and if you look at the sanctions carefully, I'll bet there was no. Betcha. Okay. Anyway, 40% of our stuff comes from the Russians. The rest comes from places like Japan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, things like that. Don't sound familiar to you. That's the actual fuel for nuclear reactor. Okay? And we don't we produce in this country, I don't know, of our needs, 2% tops. Okay. Of our fuel rod needs, I don't know that we produce any we make. I'm not aware of it. Okay. So we're totally dependent on the kindness of strangers for our nuclear power. Guess what? We have 94 civilian reactors in this country, the most of any country in the world. In case you don't know it, 20% plus of your power comes from nuclear reactors. And yet, your genius politicians are saying, shut those places down. Great. Okay. It's fine with me. Uh, I'll go in the candle business. Okay. So we have a situation here where that's basically, do we even talk about supply of uranium? I've never heard anybody talk about it. Okay. And demand is out of sight. I mean, demand is 33 times our annual production. Is nuclear power important in this country? I guess we could do without 20% of our power and without our Navy. I guess we could do without it. Okay. Why isn't anybody talking about this? Okay. Is the problem insoluble? No. But nobody seems to pay attention to this demand side problem. But no, I know you're all going to think of critical materials like gallium and germanium and rare earths and rhenium and zirconium and other things you've never heard of. Okay. And every time there's a crisis like this, or a so-called crisis, you can be sure that there'll be companies started, zirconium are us, rare earths. Oh, by the way, I'm searching for bologna sandwiches, but I found rare earths in the dirt underneath the carton. Okay. I hear this all the time. I understand the last few days the word process has entered everybody's vocabulary. Okay, so that people are finally figuring out that supply doesn't matter if we don't have the processing. The end user components enabled by the electronic or mechanical properties of these rare metals are the only thing that matters. Okay, I'm going to make a car, electric car. I need a rare earth permanent magnet synchronous motor. Okay, that needs a rare earth permanent magnet. If I don't have the magnet, I can't make the motor. I can't make the car. And does anybody think about that? No. All they tell me about is, hey, I found a deposit that's got gallium in Pascagoula. You know, it's right under a school. That's what this is. Okay, bullshit. Okay. The only question I ever ask anybody coming to me with these nonsense stories is, when you deliver me a kilogram of germanium, what's the cost to me? And they say, well, $173.10 a thing. Buying them all day long from the Chinese for 70. So don't bother. Well, it's national security, critical, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Suddenly, they're finding the germanium in every zinc deposit. The residue contains germanium, besides silver, germanium. Okay. All the coal ash in the world contains germanium. Suddenly, all of the new companies are popping up. Okay. But I do admit, Tennessee Zinc, which actually has germanium, is thinking they should process it out of the residue. They're trying to figure out if they can afford it. Okay. And all aluminum smelters, dirty word, right? Smelter, they produce gallium in the residue. Okay. Nobody's going to. Gallium presents at 5 to 50 parts per million in aluminum. So aluminum is not exactly the most expensive metal in the world. You want to extract 5 to 50 parts, it's expensive. It's never going to be profitable. Well, you know who produces the most aluminum in the world? That's right, Chinese. They also produce all the gallium. And guess who processes most of the zinc in the world? Damn, it's the Chinese again. And who produces the germanium? Chinese. Okay. We didn't think this out. We were completely focused on profit, not production, and now the chickens have come home to roost. In my opinion, we'll never catch up with China. We can't. Okay, their investment in time and effort is too massive. They have been out in the world for 25 years, ensuring they become the world's center of industrial manufacturing. They they plan that goal for 2049. They're ahead of schedule. Okay, we can supply ourselves with whatever we need. We will never be a supplier to the world of these materials again. In case you don't know it, back in the 80s, America was the world's #1 supplier of rare earths, germanium, and gallium. Believe me, I was involved. I know. Okay, none of those is true today. We import zirconium. So what, right? What's that? Part of making nuclear fuel rods need that. Okay, half the same thing. Um, the You can believe all the stuff you want coming out of Washington or any other source of propaganda in America. We can't compete. We can be self-sufficient. It's going to be costly. We will never be economically competitive with China in these so-called critical materials. It's just too late. Okay, sorry about that. That's my thought. Okay, so you can throw something at me. Make it money, please. Thank you. Any questions?
I said, is there any point of optimism to share?
No. Next question.
I have some optimism for you.
Okay.
Chinese population is going to go down 20 to 50% in the next 10, 20 years.
Okay. You can tell my grandson then I won't be around for that.
Okay. But that'll engender many changes that you're talking about.
Okay.
So you talked mostly about the rare earth side. Can you talk a little bit more about the uranium as a critical as opposed to an industrial?
Yeah, well, uranium is super critical. Okay. And it is a matter of economic life or death in the United States. Okay. It doesn't matter what you think about nuclear power. It doesn't matter if you mistake nuclear reactors for weapons. None of that matters. 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear power. Our entire Navy's striking force is nuclear powered. Okay? If we don't have uranium, we can no longer sustain either one of those. We do not have sufficient uranium in the United States to supply ourselves. We need to trade for that. The world's supply of uranium at current demand is 60 to 100 years. If China continues building reactors, Germany has some attack of common sense and goes back to nuclear power, that 60 to 100 years becomes 50 to 75 years. Okay. Now, nobody here thinks about anything beyond tomorrow. We have to think about this. We have today one uranium processing mill, Energy Fuels, in Blanding, Utah. One. It's producing approximately 1 million pounds of uranium, U3O8, yellow cake a year. Okay, has a capacity of 8 million pounds. We need to support that. If that mill got to 8 million pounds a year, it would be able to supply 25% of the needs. Okay, that one mill, that's a national champion company. Nobody pays attention. I'm sure most of you have never heard of it, right? You need to hear about it. It's the key company in the uranium space in our country. Ampco's Canadian. I mean, are you sure we're always going to be able to trade with Canada and even kill? You know, when I go to Canada on the train, I claim to be Canadian. I mean, I don't want to get shot. Okay. So I mean, for the next 3 years and 9 months, maybe Canada's not going to be such a reliable supplier. No, they're not going to sell to China. I don't know. They certainly sell to France. Okay, and France is the second largest user of uranium in the world. Okay, because the French people, I spend a lot of time. I love France, but no matter how smart you think they are, they decided not to be fossil fuel dependent on power a long time ago. 80% of their power is coming from reactors. And the French are very big mining uranium in Africa. Remember the empire, Niger? That's French. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, no, but that was bound to happen. Okay, I'm just saying, historically, okay, if you've ever been there, everybody speaks French and former French Africa, and they enjoy, and all they talk about is their last visit to Paris. I don't hear that in British Africa. Yeah, people speak English, but they're not saying, "Gee, I got to get to London." Okay, but if you talk to anybody in the former French Empire, anywhere in the world, they say, "Yeah, I was vacation in Paris last. I'm going to Paris." This and that. French are real good at that. Okay? So they have a lot of goodwill, and they're going to get uranium for a while until the Chinese beat them.
Jack, if interesting point that I just recently heard was that Ontario generates 60% of their power from nuclear.
Right.
But the point I really want to raise, just as a reminder and as a factoid along that line of thinking, the question I wanted to ask you is if it were Jack Lifton's world and people listened to you, what would be the 3 top actionable recommendations you would recommend?
Well, I would say we must become self-sufficient again in copper. We must open the mines in Arizona and Alaska, which will make us independent. The original world's largest copper mine in Utah is still functioning. Okay, and we have immense deposits in Arizona, immense deposits in Alaska, and regulation has killed them. You realize that Rio Tinto and BHP, I believe it is, in Arizona have spent $2 billion preparing that mine, and so far they haven't got a permit to open it. Okay, now, yes, Chile and Peru have a lot of copper. Chinese buy a lot of that. Okay, and Peru and Chile we have a problem with them, and Brazil. These nations are growing. They're going to be consuming an awful lot of that copper. Again, if you go away with anything except that I'm a decrepit old man, I want you to remember something. It's the demand in the producing nation that matters, not our demand. That's what's going to define how much of anything we can get from anywhere. Globalization or no, tariffs or no, doesn't matter. If Chile and Peru decide they need all that copper, or they're going to sell it to the Chinese for a better price, we're out. Simple as that. Okay, we don't send gunboats up the Nile to enforce our rules. Okay, so we're going to be screwed, and we have to think about that. Stop thinking about all the nonsense that comes out of Washington.
Jack, I got one question for you over here. I'm on the other side here.
Okay. Yep. Okay, got it.
Yeah. I'm curious. So we hear a lot about AI and
Yep.
the growing environment and all the energy needs that are just kind of in the infancies. I'm just kind of curious on some thoughts on how that plays into this whole equation, because you're talking a lot about our current numbers and we see some of those projections. I'm just curious on
If
that.
you're going to analyze the geology of a region, you need data, not AI. Once you have the data, AI is rapid computing. You can analyze it. I have a friend, he passed on now, a geologist, and he told me that when he went into Canada's Northwest Territory, look as it happened for tungsten. He said he needed just two tools: the pickaxe that the geologist uses to break rock, and a case of single malt scotch. Okay. He said, of course, the pickaxe was optional because he could eyeball the stuff. And the fact is, AI, schmai, I don't care. These are experienced men and women who spent their life doing it. They're not going to be replaced by it. Well, I'll tell you, it's going to make a huge difference in rare earths. I'll tell you why. The processing of rare earth, separation of the individual rare earths into individual ones, is very complex. Very. Okay. And I had a conversation here yesterday with an engineer who was explaining to me how using AI, he's built a management program for rare earth processing station. And this guy, I know this guy's smart, and I said, what about this problem, that problem? He knew they had answers for that. Okay, so in processing, that's going to be a real big thing. But in America, who's processing any of this stuff? See, the one thing I point out, they asked me in Washington, how are we going to find people to do this? I said, well, there's the graveyard, assisted care, and some seniors to live for individual housing. Okay, what are you talking about? Do this. They haven't been doing this for 20, 30 years. Do you think they were in suspended animation? And the kids, are they studying STEM subjects? Not that I know of. Can you repair a car? No. Okay. How about, can you fix a cell phone? No, not that either. Okay. How about a typewriter? What's a typewriter? Okay. So, you know, my dad had an auto body shop. He put me to work when I was 15. I'm sorry, Tom, I have to say this, okay? And when I couldn't fix something on a car, he said, you're as stupid as I thought you were. Okay, I'd stay up all night. Next day, I could rebuild that. Okay, because, I need my father's approval. Right? Anybody that you know can repair a carburetor, what's There's your answer. You're going to have to get some kids out of Harvard into trade school, or it's never.
Thank you, Jack.